Christ myth theory, it relies on a tactic that involves requiring them to explain data away. And so what I mean is, you'll notice that it's like playing dodgeball. You throw the dodgeball, consider the ball evidence, and it's clear evidence. Look, Tacitus clearly refers to a historical figure named Jesus and actually tells us important corroborating facts about him. He's a hostile source, at the very least a dispassionate source, and yet here it is.
Dodge, duck,
throw the dodgeball.
Dive and dodge.
And the Christ myth theory relies on them dodging out of the way of evidence constantly. So you bring up a verse, you bring up a passage which clearly goes against their theory. You know, Christ was portrayed before your eyes as crucified, Paul says. They dodge that. That's even though it clearly would go against their theory. Anything that, so there's never really positive evidence in that is in any clear, obvious way that says, here's positive evidence for this theory. It's really a dodgeball theory. It's not connecting with the evidence. It's avoiding evidence to promote the thesis. Secondly, it must make use of double standards. The Christ myth theory is filled with using double standards, specifically in regards to historiography. So I'll give you an example. They'll take lesser established historical facts. So things that maybe only have one witness, that are late dated, or things that are uncertain. They'll take those and they'll use that in an attempt to overturn more certain facts and events. That's a common thing that you'll see them do. I'll give you an example. David Fitzgerald, he's a Christ mythicist I debated. He talks about...
Is he the one who wrote Nails?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yes. He talks about, he uses this phrase all the time, a blackout period. A blackout period. And what he means by blackout period is when Jesus was said to live, and when we have the first physical text about him, it's silence. There's a blackout period.
We don't have that until the very end of the 2nd century, towards the end. So there's a 150 year, maybe as much as 200 years blackout period where we just don't know, right, wrong, whether they're true or not. We don't have any way of matching up to what the originals were.
Or he'll use it sometimes in relationship to a blackout period, in relationship to, there's Jesus's life, but then when's the first literature from? But if we use that same concept of, here's Jesus, but then here's the sources about him, and there's a blackout period in which he's applying, hijinks is going on. If we looked at that, then we've got massive problems with other historical figures.
You've seen these lists before, but like Plato's Dialogues, date of original 4th century BC. Our earliest manuscript is from 900 AD. Homer's Iliad, 9th century BC. Earliest manuscript 400 BC. Herodotus 425 BC. Earliest manuscript 900 AD. Aristotle. You go down the list. Here's Julius Caesar.
Right.
58 BC to 44 BC. The original events.
But here's my question: whenever anybody gives me a list like this, I say, why are we comparing apples and oranges? You can't prove that the Gospels are good. You can't prove that the Gospel's good by showing how bad Homer's.
That's not the argument. The argument is to say something like a blackout period. What do you call this then?
Those are huge blackout periods.
So that's a huge blackout period.
So one problem, it's explaining away data. 2, double standards. 3, they continually make arguments from silence. So I'll give you an example. The Christ myth theory, it relies upon making arguments from silence. So since really there's not evidence for the position, it's positive evidence, instead what they have to do is make an argument from silence. They'll say, Mark and John don't mention the virgin birth, therefore it means they didn't know about it, or it didn't happen, or that myth wasn't established, or something like that. But they'll make a big deal that it's not in Mark and John. Philo supposedly should have mentioned Jesus, but he didn't, therefore Jesus didn't exist.
Why don't we have contemporary eyewitnesses for during when these events were actually happening?
who would be the people that were writing that you know of that were contemporary at the time?
Well, let's go with Philo of Alexandria.
Okay, how many times did he visit Jerusalem?
Well, here's the thing.
Once.
He was
He only visited Jerusalem once.
All right. I'm not saying he was. I was not saying he was on there to be an eyewitness, but his family and himself were definitely connected to Jerusalem and the goings on.
Concerning the virgin birth, it's Luke that has them. Yeah, Mark doesn't have it, but at best, that could support the legend theory. In Mark, you still have mentions of, Christ and so on.
Sometimes I'll ask them, I'll say, so if the virgin birth was mentioned in all four gospels, you would believe it then? You see, so what's their argument that they're even making when they say that? Because the feeding of the 5,000 is in all four gospels. I don't think that they believe that it happened. So sometimes it's like we want to know what they're even trying to argue in the first place. Not only that, a fourth problem that the Christ myth theory has is that it has no plausible alternative that makes sense of Christian history. What I mean by that is there's no legitimate alternative to make sense of what happened when we start to see the rise of Christianity. Now, each one of them sometimes, because that's a common question. I used to listen to Robert Price a lot, Bible Geek program and all this. And one of the questions that he would get would be, his followers would say, okay, you've got me convinced, the invisible shrinking son of man or whatever, that Jesus never existed. But what did happen? How did Christianity begin? And then he'll go on this long spiel, literally kind of speculating almost out of thin air about how the Christian church was invented, how it got off the ground, how it convinced others, the motivation for the people who were involved with this, who were the people involved with this. There's all these unanswered questions all of a sudden because you took away the most likely explanation as far as part of it, which is Jesus was a real historical figure that inspired a movement of followers, including some people who knew him personally. You take that away, you do need to explain what happened in history, because it's clear there's Christians, and it's clear that they're pretty quick, and it's clear some of them are claiming to know Jesus or know people who did know him, and it's so what do you do instead? They'd never answer that. And the funny thing is, I mentioned Robert Price and the answers he would give. His version of the alternate explanation of how the church got off the ground and all that is not identical to Richard Carrier's alternative explanation to try to make sense of church history. It creates a problem, and they don't really view. It's like they don't understand. You take this away, and they think they're shortcutting Christianity just by getting it at the root. But it's like they don't understand they're creating all other kinds of problems. But I get the sense they don't really care about that. And lastly, a problem I'll mention is that the Christ myth theory, it forces an unnatural paradigm limiting interpretation of relevant texts. What I mean by that is good exegesis of basic documents in history is simply not allowed, because you have to have these strange readings of things that are clear and that are there, and you have to do other things. And so that's why, for example, they actually engage in what's called conjectural emendation. There'll be places where they simply can't deal with the data. They'll say, well, I actually think that that was written later and inserted or something like that. And you say, okay, well, what's the evidence? Let me see. I think I have a book on an example of these. Let me try to find this real quick to give you an example. By the way, so let me define quickly conjectural emendation. Conjectural emendation means a conjecture, so a speculation about a text that was changed and therefore needs to be read differently in the modern documents. Meaning, we'll have something in the New Testament, for example, that is evidenced in all of the papyri and the relevant sources we have say it's Matthew 28, right? 19 and 20 or something. You know, it's in every copy of Matthew we have that has the end of Matthew. But there's some people who make a conjectural emendation and say, well, for this reason, I don't believe that Matthew 28, 19, and 20 are original to the text of Matthew. And their arguments are not based upon variations within the manuscript tradition, meaning they don't go back to anything physical in the paper trail, if you want to put it that way. They're based upon other factors, and that's called a conjectural emendation.
Well, even when you talk about Jesus Christ crucified, I don't think that with that you even have the kind of possibilities you want to portray. I think most people that are living in Rome, especially when they hear Jesus is crucified, they understand it the way we would see a picture of a crucifixion. And in fact,
that's not true, because the
evidence for that even is the starograms, for example.
I cite the most recent scholarship on this that shows that the word he uses is generic. It actually refers to all different types of execution, including Jewish execution. So it's actually not even specific to Roman execution. All he's saying is that Jesus was hung up, essentially, hung up on a piece of wood, which we know could happen in supernatural realms. We know from the Ascension of Isaiah that when we look at the earliest recreatable or reconstructible redaction of that, that it appears to say that Satan and his demons are the ones who crucified Jesus in the lower heavens. So the possibility is there. So we would need more to be sure of what Paul's saying, because Paul never actually situates the crucifixion in any particular place, right?
No, I mean,
he never says the Romans did it. Never says the Jews did it.
1 Thessalonians 2.
Well, there's that.
You have to assume.
Then you're on the debate of the interpolation.
You're making a conjectural emendation. That means a guess that something shouldn't be there.
It's not conjectural. We have evidence, though. It's not a conjecture. We have good case.
I know that you believe you need evidence for your. I know you. Believe
no, but
you
we
need
have it. It's in peer-reviewed literature. We have a good case for this. So
you don't have any textual data. You don't have any manuscript evidence.
Yeah, okay. we know there are.
That's where we disagree.
Yeah.
I don't agree to go around making conjectural emendation.
It's not conjectural. We have evidence for it.
That's actually the technical name for that type of guess.
No, not at all. No, a conjecture is if you just conjecture.
No. What I'm saying is, I'm speaking in the technical, like the TC world, the textual critical world. They use the phrase conjectural emendation. I'm not saying it as like diss, like, oh, you're conjecturing. I'm actually saying they call that type of guess. It's called a conjectural emendation.
But then that's not a criticism.
You amend the text, but you don't actually have the manuscript evidence.
Right.
You do it for other reasons. I don't find that satisfactory at all.
Oh, no, we do that all the time. We have to do that all the time, because we know there are tons of these errors in the text that we won't have manuscript evidence for.
We don't go around guessing.
It's not a guess. We have evidence.
We
present a case.
Right, here's the evidence. When a manuscript has a variant, that's the evidence.
No,
sometimes when we get into this, atheists will say, well, you can't go to the Bible, But here's the thing. If you can show, which we can, that the early Christians were preaching a Jesus who lived on the earth and was, had a death, burial, and resurrection and ascension, and you can show that it's an early belief, you've got to deal with, okay, when was this belief made up then? Because clearly it's being taught here. And so when I go to Galatians, I see that there's evidence all throughout the book of Galatians for the biblical understanding of Jesus. And the reason why this is important, because again, it's saying that early Christians saw him this way, not the way the Christ mythers say. And so remember, first of all, in Galatians, Paul talks about knowing Peter and James. He talks about James, the brother of our Lord. That's important right there. Then I mentioned this earlier, Christ was publicly crucified, Galatians 3:1, where it says, it was before your eyes that Jesus Christ was publicly portrayed as crucified. Galatians 3:13, Christ redeemed us from the curse of the law by becoming a curse for us, for it is written, cursed is everyone who is hanged on a tree. So this is real physical stuff. Galatians 3:16 speaks about his Jewish ancestry, but referring to one and to your offspring who is Christ. This is all physical stuff. Someone who lived on the earth and was a Jew and had a lineage. His birth and life under the Old Testament law is mentioned in Galatians 4:4. God sent forth his son, born of woman, born under the law. And that's just one. You could go to multiple letters and show, there's clear evidence, because one complaint they'll say, you know, Paul's letters don't really have much biographical material about Jesus. So I think those are important things to recognize, and you can tell that this theory takes a lot, because we're barely just scratching the surface. It takes a lot to really get into and deal with. But the beautiful thing is you get to learn more about Jesus, about how history is done, about the first century environs, about the early church. The beautiful thing is, as you get into having to deal with the Christ myth theory, the things that you get to learn about are amazing, beautiful things that are important for Christians to know. And so it's definitely a worthy exercise to answer the arguments of the Christ mythers, I believe. And so that's why I've spent some time in my prior endeavors doing it. Writings outside the New Testament which are relevant to this, which we can glean a lot about the historical Jesus as well, and show us that the early Christians certainly believed in historical Jesus.